The town was shrouded in fog. Detective James Holloway stepped out of his car, the gravel crunching under his worn leather shoes. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic. Ravenwood. The name itself sounded like a bad omen. The town was deathly quiet, the silence broken only by the distant cawing of crows. A shiver ran down Holloway's spine. He could feel eyes on him, watching from behind the fog-veiled windows of the houses lining the street. Holloway took a deep breath and started towards the only sign of life he could see, a flickering neon sign in the distance. It read, "Sheriff's Office." Each step towards the light felt heavier than the last. As he reached the sheriff's office, a figure emerged from the fog. Sheriff Hank Grayson.
Detective Holloway, I presume?
Grayson's voice was gruff, seasoned by years of smoking and too much coffee. He extended a calloused hand.
We've been expecting you.
Sheriff Grayson, tell me, what have we gotten ourselves into here?
Grayson led him inside, the office small and cluttered. Wanted posters and missing person flyers lined the walls.
People have been disappearing, vanishing without a trace.
Any leads? Any suspects?
None. It's like they just walked into thin air, but there's something else.
He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper.
They all talk about the mansion.
Mansion?
Grayson pointed to a faded photograph on his desk. It showed a sprawling Victorian mansion, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy.
Elmwood Mansion, it's been abandoned for decades. Locals say it's cursed.
Holloway felt a chill crawl up his spine. The drive to Elmwood Mansion was a blur of fog and gnarled trees. The mansion loomed before them, a skeletal silhouette against the gray sky. Stepping out of the car, Holloway felt a chill crawl up his spine.
Place gives me the creeps.
Grayson muttered, his hand hovering near his holster. The front door creaked open as if inviting them in. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering in through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Dust motes danced in the stale air, swirling around them like ghostly apparitions. The silence within the mansion was unnerving. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence that listened, that watched their every move. As they walked through the decaying grandeur of the mansion, Holloway couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every creaking floorboard, every rustling curtain seemed to whisper a warning. They reached a hallway, its walls adorned with peeling wallpaper and faded portraits of stern-faced individuals who seemed to follow them with their eyes. The padlock was old, rusted but sturdy. Grayson took out a pair of bolt cutters from his belt and snapped it open. The door creaked open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase leading to the attic. The musty smell of decay was overpowering. The attic was a cavernous space lit only by slivers of light piercing through the gaps in the boarded-up windows. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and dust lay thick on the floor. And then Holloway saw them. Deep, parallel scratches on the wooden floor, like something had been dragged across it. The scratches led to an old wooden chest, tucked away in the darkest corner of the attic.
What do you think it is?
I don't know, Sheriff, but something tells me we're about to find out.
He took out a set of lockpicks from his coat pocket and got to work. The lock was complex, but Holloway was patient. After what seemed like an eternity, he felt the lock give way. He took a deep breath and slowly opened the chest. Inside the chest, nestled amongst yellowed parchment and brittle quills, lay a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the once gilded lettering barely visible.
Holloway carefully lifted it out, his fingers brushing against the cold, aged leather. As he opened the journal, a musty smell like that of old books and forgotten memories wafted out. The first page bore a name written in elegant, flowing script: Edward Carver.
The entries were dated starting from the late 1800s. Holloway began to read, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The journal told the story of Edward Carver, the mansion's original owner.
But as the entries progressed, a darkness began to seep into them. Carver wrote of strange dreams, of whispers he heard in the dead of night, of a growing sense of dread that permeated the mansion.
He wrote of a darkness that he felt consuming him, a presence that whispered to him from the shadows, promising him power in exchange for something unspeakable.
The final entry sent a chill down Holloway's spine. It was filled with a chilling resignation, an acceptance of his fate. The next few days were a blur of interviews and dead ends. Holloway visited the families of the missing. Their grief was palpable, their hope dwindling with each passing day. But there was something else, a recurring thread that ran through their stories: the dreams.
Almost all the families mentioned their loved ones having vivid nightmares before they disappeared. Dreams of a sprawling mansion shrouded in fog, of being drawn towards it by an unseen force.
He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, mumbling about a dark figure and a house that called to him, she said, her voice trembling.
Holloway listened, his mind racing. The journal, the dreams, the disappearances, they were all connected, pieces of a macabre puzzle that he was desperately trying to solve.
He returned to the mansion that night, driven by a growing sense of urgency. He had to stop it, whatever it was, before it claimed another soul.
As he stepped out of his car, the fog seemed to swirl around him, thicker than before, almost as if it was expecting him. The mansion seemed to pulsate with an unseen energy as Holloway entered. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread, the silence broken only by the creaking of the old house settling around him. He could feel it now, the presence that lurked within these walls.
He walked through the decaying grandeur, each step echoing in the silence. The air grew colder as he approached the attic door, the metal padlock cold and unforgiving under his touch. He didn't bother with the bolt cutters this time. The door creaked open as if beckoning him inside.
The attic was just as he remembered it, shrouded in shadows and dust. The old chest lay open, Edward Carver's journal resting on top. But something was different. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive.
And then he saw it. A faint glow emanating from the far corner of the attic where the scratches on the floor led.
It pulsed with an unnatural light, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. As Holloway cautiously approached, the air grew heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The glow intensified, revealing its source. A swirling vortex of darkness, its edges crackling with an unseen energy.
Fear, primal and instinctive, threatened to overwhelm Holloway. He'd faced down hardened criminals, stared death in the face, but nothing could have prepared him for this. This was something different, something old and powerful, something that defied explanation. He thought of the missing people, their faces flashing in his mind. He thought of the families, their grief and despair, a tangible weight in the air. He thought of Edward Carver, his descent into madness echoing within these walls. And he knew he couldn't turn back. This darkness, this entity, it had held Ravenwood captive for far too long, feeding on the fear and despair of its inhabitants.
He reached for his hip, his fingers closing around the reassuring weight of his service revolver. It was a futile gesture, he knew, a symbol of defiance against something far older and more powerful than anything he could comprehend. He took a step closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The vortex pulsed, the intensity of its glow increasing as if sensing his defiance.
The answer, when it came, was not a blinding flash of insight, but a quiet whisper in the back of his mind. It wasn't about fighting the darkness head-on, it was about understanding it. Edward Carver's journal. It wasn't just a chronicle of madness, it was a map. Carver had been seduced by the darkness, promised power in exchange for something unspeakable. He had performed a ritual, a dark pact that bound him and the mansion to this entity.
Holloway quickly retreated from the attic, the oppressive weight of the entity's gaze lessening with every step he took away from the vortex. He rushed down the creaking stairs, Carver's journal clutched tightly in his hand. He had to get back to the sheriff's office. He had to study the journal, to find the ritual, the incantation, the key to breaking this curse. As he burst out of the mansion, the fog seemed to part around him, as if startled by his sudden exit. He didn't waste time looking back. He jumped into his car and sped away from Elmwood Mansion. He could feel it, though, watching him, its power waning the further he drove from the mansion. It was a small victory, a temporary reprieve, but Holloway knew this wasn't over. The sheriff's office, with its flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee, had never felt more welcoming. Holloway spread out the journal on Grayson's desk, explaining his theory. The connection between Carver's descent into madness, the ritual, and the disappearances. The sheriff listened with skepticism, but Holloway saw the fear in his eyes. Fear for his town, for his people.
They spent hours poring over the journal, searching for any mention of the ritual. A single passage, scrawled on the last page, barely legible. The pact can be broken, but the price will be steep.
What did it mean, and could they break the curse before the darkness claimed another victim?
The fog had lifted, revealing a town bathed in the soft light of dawn, but the sense of unease remained, a palpable tension in the air. Holloway stood at the edge of town, gazing back at the silhouette of Elmwood Mansion. He had spent the night studying the ritual, deciphering its cryptic instructions. He knew what he had to do, but the knowledge sat heavy in his gut. He turned to Grayson, who stood beside him, his face etched with hope and trepidation.
"It ends tonight," Holloway said, his voice firm, "one way or another."
As he drove back towards the mansion, the sun setting behind him, Holloway couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, but he had come too far to turn back now. The fate of Ravenwood rested on his next move, and as he stepped out of the car, the fog rolling in around him, he knew the final confrontation was about to begin.